All right, here we go with an introduction to sensation and perception. Did you know people can experience excruciating pain in limbs that have been amputated? This is known as phantom pain. This is where people continue to feel pain, itching, tingling long after a limb has been amputated because that absence or static gets interpreted as pain because there was once information coming from a place and it's not anymore. This absence of information in the ears can cause tinnitus. So that's that ringing that people get in their ears that accompanies hearing loss. Did you know you can see a candle burning 30 miles away on a clear, dark night? You can hear the tick of a watch at 20 feet under quiet conditions. You can taste 1 teaspoon of sugar dissolved in 2 gallons of water. You can smell 1 drop of perfume in a 6-room apartment. These are actually all considered absolute thresholds. So the receptors that you have for vision, hearing, taste, smell, or touch, which I didn't include here. So touch being that like movement of skin or pressure on the skin. The absolute threshold there would be you could feel the wing of a bee falling on your cheek from about 1 centimeter away. Did you know you have a blind spot on the back of each eye that does not transmit any visual information to your brain? This is because your optic nerve, which is that bundle of axons which receive neural impulses from the retina, they're going to be bringing information messages to the occipital lobe ultimately. It has to leave the eye, and in that space, there can't be any interpretation of information. But because you know that you don't have a space in what you're viewing, your mind just fills in the missing spots. Did you know that loud music or other loud noises can cause permanent hearing loss? That hearing loss, again, can cause tinnitus, so that ringing constantly in your ears. I don't know if you've experienced that, like having gone to a concert and, coming home and the next day hearing all that ringing. That's permanent damage that you're doing to your ears. So when you go to concerts, trust me, bring in some earplugs and you'll hear the concert just fine. It really won't take away from the experience. And in the meantime, you also protect your ears. Your future self will thank you. And I think you do know about this because we talked about it already. So did you know that some people commonly experience synesthesia? So they see colors that feel warm or cold, hear sounds that are orange and purple, taste foods that feel like different shapes. So sensation, that process of receiving and converting, transmitting information from the outside world inward. So obviously you'd be using sensory neurons. Remember that? Same sensory neurons are afferent, motor neurons are afferent, sensory neurons, you're taking information from the outside world and bringing it in. So what's actually coming in through your ears, your eyes, your nose, skin, tongue, that would be your sensation. And mostly when we're talking about your sensation, we're looking at your extraceptive senses, like vision, hearing, taste, smell, and touch, but those are not the only sensations that you have. You have interoceptive senses, the pain and movement of body organs, and your proprioceptive senses, which basically tell you where your body is in space. One of the things that you might notice with somebody with an autism spectrum disorder would be that they have trouble with proprioceptive senses, that they're not exactly sure where their body is in space. And remember with autism spectrum disorder that they either are hyper or hyposensitive to senses, and that a lot of the symptoms that you see, the problems with their behavior, communication, or social skills are often a result of this hyper or hyposensitivity to their senses. Now, perception is how you interpret that sensory stimuli. And it's really hard to actually tell the difference between what you're sensing and what you're perceiving. Because, all right, so if you were to eat a Starburst, picture yourself chewing the Starburst and swallowing the Starburst. Well, when did it go from chewing to swallowing? Like, is there a distinct difference there? Because I feel like the boundary is not all that clear. And the same thing with sensation and perception. There's a lot of overlap, and a lot of what we perceive we mistake as sensation. And I hope to make that make more sense as I go along. And here's another example of how the boundary between sensations and perception, it's rather ambiguous. If sensation, you're looking at this white picture here, but white background really, with in the figure you see these black lines, angles, whatever color you see. your perception would say that that's a cube. And while nothing about the sensations will change really, while you're looking at it, you can kind of consider that this is in the front. But you could just as easily consider that this part is the front. And that's where the perceptual shift is going to come in. And again, do you see a young woman looking back over her shoulder, or do you see an older woman with her chin buried in the fur of her jacket? This picture, I think I have it hanging in my classroom. It's actually called My Wife and My Mother-in-Law. I always find it kind of funny. Some people have trouble seeing one image or the other. So just to kind of help you with this, if you're looking at the younger woman looking back over her shoulder, this is kind of her jaw right here. There's her nose and her eyes. She's looking in that direction. And if you're looking at the older woman, this is her nose right here. This is her chin and her mouth. Again, the sensations remain the same, the dots and lines and whatever you're seeing in the picture, but what you perceive it to be, that's perception. And perception can shift a lot, and does, as you learn, as you grow. And I know that these two terms have come up before, but you really do need to know the difference between bottom-up and top-down processing. So with bottom-up processing, your analysis starts at the senses, is what you want to know. It starts with the senses. With top-down processing, you have expectations that are going to affect what you see. So to give you an example of how each would work, for bottom-up processing, let's say you're out walking through the woods, it's nighttime, and you see some flicker in the distance, and you hear some crackle, maybe you smell some smoke. Your neural signals are going to be sending information to your brain, and you're collecting this together. And then you might decide that you're coming across, it could be like a fire somewhere. Maybe there's a forest fire. Maybe there's a camping situation. With top-down processing, you, let's say, know that you're going to a campsite. And so you have these expectations. So you're going to notice things about a campsite instead of this different sensations coming in. And this image sort of helps to demonstrate it. So this image can help illustrate the point. So if you look at this top thing here, what is it? Is it a B? Is it a 13? Is it something else? Who knows? You kind of look at it, try to piece it together and decide what it is. That would be bottom-up processing. But if you see it in here, in this context, you're like, okay, 12, 13, 14. Yet if you see it in this context, A, B, C, so you notice that just looking at the image and trying to figure it out, bottom up. Putting it in context, you have an expectation that you're going to get a number there or a letter, so that's top down. And for each of your sensory organs, you have these receptors, these special cells that are going to receive and process information from the environment. So you have specific things that are responding to sound waves or touch, pressure, heat, cold, odor molecules, whatever. And the entire job of these receptors is transduction. You do need to know this. So transduction is when the sensory receptors convert the stimulus that they're getting into a neural impulse. So obviously, if I am looking at something and I'm seeing it, there are light waves that I'm dealing with, and we'll go over that. But obviously, light waves are not traveling through my brain. They are traveling through my eye. And it's going to be in the back of my eye, in the retina. It's going to transduce. There are special cells in my retina which are going to transduce the light into neural impulse so that it can be perceived. And for as much as we want to perceive certain things, our brain also wants to limit what we are noticing with certain things as well. So why in the world would we want to limit certain sensory information? Well, think about it. Imagine just sitting there at your desk or wherever you are right now, feeling every piece of clothes on your body, like every little thing, not just that tag that might be annoying you, but everything. Imagine hearing the blood rushing through your veins at all times. It'd be really hard to concentrate on anything. So at some point your brain has to say, this is important and this is what I'll pay attention to, and this is not important and I will not pay attention to this. And mostly what you're going to find is that there are constant things that we ignore. Anything that doesn't change at all tends to get tuned out. I don't mean things that repeat, I just mean things that remain rather constant. So this filtering and analyzing of incoming sensations before sending the neural message to the cortex, it's done for survival reasons. And yet some things get passed no matter what. So almost all animals will wake when they hear a loud noise. You remember your reticular formation, how it's going to screen out certain information and allow other information through. It's going to send messages to your thalamus. Remember your thalamus, that sensory relay station, which is responsible for sending sensory information to your brain from all of your major sensory organs, except your nose, except for olfaction. And remember, your reticular formation tells you what's important, and there's some things that you can't really tune out all that easily, like the slightest whimpering of a newborn baby, specifically your newborn baby. And as to the question of how does the brain differentiate between various incoming sensations, such as sounds and smells, well, it's through a process called coding. It's going to convert particular sensory input into specific sensations. Essentially, you take something like sounds and smells, have neural impulses that travel through different routes and arrive in different parts of the brain. As a quick review, remember, taste, touch, and movement is going to be all interpreted by your parietal lobes, a little bit in your temporal lobe as well. Vision will be processed in your occipital lobe, hearing in your temporal lobe, and olfaction is mostly interpreted in your limbic system. All right, now absolute threshold, difference threshold, just noticeable difference, Weber's law, kind of grouping them together here. They're big items on the AP exam. I'm not really sure what they're going to hit on the short answers this year, but these are always likely candidates. So the absolute threshold is the smallest amount of a stimulus needed in order to notice it, being able to pinpoint the appearance of a stimuli 50% of the time. Those did you know questions at the beginning of these slides about seeing a flame of a candle flickering from about 30 miles away, the ticking of a watch from about 20 feet away, those are all examples of absolute thresholds. So to give you an example, when you go in for those hearing tests at the nurse's office, when they're looking at your absolute threshold, they're looking to be able to pinpoint the point at which you can hear something about 50% of the time. One of the ways that we can detect if there's been hearing loss is to compare somebody's hearing to that of a standard absolute threshold. The difference threshold is also called the just noticeable difference. It's also referred to as Weber's law. And the basic thing here is, how much does something need to change for you to notice that there has been a change? So you take somebody, say, in our class who has really short hair. If they get a haircut, they come in the next day and everybody comments on it. Somebody with really long hair can get several inches cut off their hair, and most people won't notice it. And that's because of just noticeable differences. The percentage of change hasn't been enough for people to notice that there is a difference. So some of Weber's constants would work like this. The saltiness of food. So if I cook you a meal and you notice that it's too salty, consider that for you to notice a change in the amount of salt in your food, the salt content needs to change by 20%. So if you're tasting too much salt in your food, there's a lot of salt in your food. The pressure on skin needs to change about 14% before you'd notice it. The loudness of sounds needs to change about 10% before you notice a change in volume. A change in smell, 5% change in smell, and you'll notice it. The heaviness of weights. You could lift, as long as it's less than 2% more, you won't even notice that you're lifting more. So 2% and you'll notice a change in the heaviness of something. In the brightness of lights, about 1.7%, and you'll notice that there's been a change in the brightness. When it comes to pitch of sound, it's like 0.3% before you'll notice a change. Bottom line is, you can, oversalt your food, but you better sing in tune because people will notice that faster. Sensory adaptation is when a constant stimulus is presented for a length of time, the sensation fades or disappears. So think of it like this. You walk into your friend's house and there's a new baby in the house. So you walk in and the whole house smells like dirty diapers, but nobody else seems to notice it. And as long as you're there long enough, you won't notice it either. You jump into a swimming pool and it's freezing cold. And then after a while, you're like, this water feels great. You stop noticing how cold it is because the water temperature itself doesn't change. So those people who like to like stick their toes in first and then their feet and go in bit by bit are just taking a much longer time to adjust. Sensory adaptation is going to take a lot longer, so you're going to torture yourself a little bit longer in that case. An exception to this, though, is vision. Things don't tend to disappear from our sight. And one of the reasons why we don't experience sensory adaptation with sight is because our eyes are constantly making these little micro quivering movements. And because they're constantly moving, the information is constantly refreshed and we don't experience things disappearing. And honestly, from an evolutionary perspective, we just don't waste our time and attention on things that are unchanging. Our brain copes. We pay attention to things that change. But there are certain stimuli that we will not adapt to. So like a strong odor, like ammonia, we won't adapt to it. The heat of a desert sun, the pain of a burned hand. We don't adapt to these things because experiencing them has survival value. It helps us to act in a way that keeps us safe. And I know we've gone over endorphins before, but I'm bringing it up here because if we don't adapt to, say, something like pain, how do athletes keep playing despite their painful injuries sometimes? Well, endorphins are how. Remember, endorphins are your natural painkillers, like morphine. It's going to relieve the pain by inhibiting pain perception. The pain signals are coming through substance P. And that's the entire idea behind acupuncture, this Chinese technique of gently twisting thin needles placed on the skin. You just put heat lamps over it, sometimes light weights or something on the skin, and it releases endorphins and makes people feel good. I know it sounds strange if you haven't done it before. They're not actually, breaking the skin. It's not like you're going to bleed in that way. I actually have done it before and it's quite relaxing for migraines. Very helpful, actually. Okay, so Melzack and Wall have this gate control theory. And so your experience of pain depends on whether or not pain messages can get past what they call the gatekeeper. So this gate is normally kept shut by impulses coming from the brain or information coming in through large diameter fibers in the spinal cord that conduct most sensory signals. If this tissue is damaged, then signals from smaller fibers get through. But this is also why you can't seem to get both pain and blocking pain signals through at the same time. So substance P and endorphins are going to conflict. So if you shake your hands when you burnt your hand and so you start shaking it, or you see people rock or like rub something that hurts, you're actually actively engaging in the act of blocking pain signals. And so that's really what you want to know, is that gate control theory. Substance P opens the gate, endorphins closes the gate. Substance P is saying pain signals are going through, endorphins are saying no, they're not.